A case interview hypothesis can make the difference between solving a case quickly, efficiently, and easily, and struggling to get through a case. It is one of the key skills that separates case interview pros from beginners and intermediates. Learning how to use hypotheses in case interviews effectively can drastically improve your case interview performance almost instantaneously. I'm a former Bain manager and interviewer, and if you hate spending hundreds of hours preparing for case interviews, don't worry, because I'll teach you everything you need to know about case interview hypotheses in under 10 minutes. In this video, we'll cover what is a hypothesis, why should you use a hypothesis for case interviews, when should you state your hypothesis, how specific does your hypothesis need to be, and what does using a hypothesis actually look like in a case interview. So, what is a hypothesis? A hypothesis-driven approach involves formulating educated guesses about the business problem and then testing them. Here are a few examples of what it sounds like to state a hypothesis during a case interview. First example, the decline in profits is either due to a decrease in revenue, an increase in costs, or a combination of both. Let's look into revenue first. I want to test whether the decline in profits is due to a decrease in revenue. Second example, to recommend entering this new market, the market needs to be attractive in terms of size, growth rate, and average profit margins. I propose we start by analyzing the market. Third example, so far, we've concluded that acquiring this target company makes sense. The market is attractive and the target has a competitive advantage. However, I'd like to also know if there are significant synergies that can be realized. Why should you use a hypothesis for case interviews? There are 4 main benefits of using a hypothesis-driven approach in your case interviews. The first is that a hypothesis helps you focus on relevant issues or questions. By having a hypothesis, you have an idea of what questions or issues will be relevant to supporting or rejecting your hypothesis. Therefore, you'll be spending your time answering questions and conducting analyses that are relevant to getting you closer to solving the case. If a question or analysis does not help you refine your hypothesis, it is likely not relevant to the case. Without a hypothesis, you'll have a harder time determining what questions or issues are relevant. Number 2, a hypothesis helps you prioritize your time. In a case interview, you won't have time to answer every question that you can think of. By having a hypothesis, you can focus your time and efforts on answering questions that will help you refine your hypothesis. This ensures that all of your time is spent on answering the most important questions of the case. Answering questions that have little impact on your hypothesis should be deprioritized. Number 3, a hypothesis helps you steer the direction of the case. With a hypothesis, you'll always have some kind of idea of what to do next. You can propose answering a question or performing an analysis that would strengthen the support for your hypothesis. You could also propose a next step that would refine your hypothesis and make it more specific. And number 4, a hypothesis helps you develop your ultimate recommendation. Throughout the case, your hypothesis is basically a work-in-progress version of your recommendation. Once you have gathered enough information to support your hypothesis with data and evidence, your hypothesis becomes your recommendation at the end of the case. By developing a hypothesis early in the case and continuing to refine it, you are getting a head start on developing your recommendation. When should you state your hypothesis? You should try to state your hypothesis as early as you can in a case interview. Typically, candidates state their hypotheses after presenting their case framework to the interviewer and before proposing which area of their framework to start in. Sometimes, you won't have enough data or information to even make a hypothesis. In these circumstances, you should first explicitly state to the interviewer that you do not have sufficient information to make a well-informed hypothesis. Then, state what information you would first need to know to develop a reasonable hypothesis. This way, you can demonstrate to the interviewer that you would like to use a hypothesis-driven approach without forcing yourself to make an arbitrary hypothesis. Once you have gathered further information on the case, you should make a hypothesis as early as possible. How specific does your hypothesis need to be? In general, your hypotheses near the beginning of the case will be broad, while your hypotheses near the end of the case will be more specific. This makes sense because your hypothesis becomes more and more refined and focused as the case goes on. Each time you test your hypothesis, you should be getting slightly closer to the answer. For example, if you are dealing with a profitability case, the following hypotheses would be too specific to state as your first hypothesis. The decline in profits could be driven by the recent trade embargo between the US and China. The decline in profits could be driven by a new competitor that has entered the market that is taking market share from our client by charging lower prices. The decline in profits could be driven by an increase in costs due to rising foreign currency exchange rates. These are specific hypotheses that are more appropriate near the end of the case interview if the information and data suggest these possibilities. Conversely, the following hypotheses would be too broad to state near the end of the case interview. The decline in profits is due to a decline in revenue, or the decline in profits is due to an increase in costs. These are broad hypotheses that should have been used near the beginning of the case interview as a starting point to narrow down the answer. What does using a hypothesis-driven approach actually look like? Let's say that we are solving a profitability case and are trying to determine why profits have gone down. Let's start off the case with a hypothesis that costs have increased. We discover that costs have remained flat over the past 5 years. So, let's change or pivot our hypothesis and state that we believe revenue has decreased. This was in fact true, so we'll make our hypothesis more specific and say that perhaps there is a decrease in quantity sold. Let's say we find out that the company has sold 20% fewer products this year compared to last year. Our hypothesis is that this is driven by a shrinking market. Let's say that we discover that the market has actually been growing at 2% per year. We will change our hypothesis and say that perhaps customers don't like the product. However, let's say we discover that customer needs and preferences are changing and that customers want a product that is more durable. We will revise our hypothesis once more. Our latest hypothesis is that the product needs to be made more durable in order to solve our profitability issue. Notice in this example that the hypothesis is incorrect several times. That is completely normal. An incorrect hypothesis helps narrow the universe of potential answers, bringing you closer to finding the correct answer. Also notice that the hypothesis gets more and more specific as you uncover more information. Let's look at another example. In this example, let's say we are trying to solve a market entry case and determine whether a company should enter a new market. To decide whether to enter the market, let's start with a hypothesis that the market is attractive. We uncover that the market is large, growing quickly, and has high profit margins. Our hypothesis at this point is that we should enter the market. However, we uncover that our company does not have the capabilities to enter. They lack the knowledge and expertise, the distribution channels, and the brand name. Let's revise our hypothesis and say that we should not enter the market. However, we discover that the company is actually desperate to enter the market. If they don't, their revenues will decrease by 30% per year, eventually reaching zero. Let's change our hypothesis and say that we should enter the market through an acquisition. Let's say we look into this and find that there are 5 potential companies we should acquire. Company D has the largest market share and highest brand awareness. Our revised hypothesis is that we should acquire Company D. However, we discover that Company D is too expensive, but Company C has the second largest market share, a competitive advantage over Company D, and the acquisition price is fair. Therefore, our new hypothesis is that we should enter the market through an acquisition of Company C. In summary, you've learned what a case interview hypothesis is, why you should use one, when to state your hypothesis in a case interview, and how specific or generic your hypothesis should be. You can now start to practice using a hypothesis to solve your case interviews more quickly, easily, and efficiently. If you're looking for a step-by-step shortcut to learn case interviews quickly, check out our comprehensive case interview course and books. Links are in the video description. We teach the most robust, effective case interview strategies in the least time-consuming way to save you hundreds of hours of prep time and help you land multiple consulting job offers.